Thank you all so much for coming. This has been a wonderful turnout for our first sort of half-day guide outdoor educator day. So we're very pleased with the turnout and the speakers. Give yourself a round of applause. Yeah. And again, thanks to our sponsors, the Exxon Valdez Oil Spill Trustee, the Prince William Sound Regional Citizens Advisory Council, the Oil Spill Recovery Institute, and the Prince William Science Center. And let's give a hand for Lee of Alaska Sea Grant for putting together our what you call them, interactive activities. So thanks, Lee, a lot for doing that. Also, the city of Whittier has provided the space here, and the list goes on and on. Who's on the organizing committee for the? Go ahead and raise your hand if you're on the committee that organizes this thing. I know Kelly's on it, William, Tim, Alex von Whitman was here. So round of applause to them. Yeah, Kelly. A lot of work goes into this. I appreciate that. Tomorrow we'll get going. What time are they going at? 9 a.m. tomorrow for a full day of more of the fun and information. But last up, and remember the evaluation/survey out in the lobby. And if you're not already, join us as a member. So lastly, I want to introduce Heather Reiss. Heather was a student of mine at APU, and it's really I'm proud to see her evolve her career and her business that she'll be with Cultural Connections. And Heather's is going to lead this session on cultural connections, focusing on enhancing your cultural communication skills as a tour guide, and we'll be learning how to respectfully educate our tourists and clients about local indigenous cultures, fostering empathy and critical thinking. Heather?
Okay. I love speaking into a microphone. Feeling very professional. So hey guys, you made it through the first half of the day. I'm so glad to see so many of you here. My name is Heather, as Paul introduced, and I am a current graduate student at Alaska Pacific University in the Masters of Outdoor and Environmental Education program. I have worked in tourism for 20 years as a guide in various capacities, from Yellowstone National Park, Tetons, Denali National Park, and various companies like Road Scholar and nonprofit educational companies. So in my career, I've had a chance to work quite a bit with native populations, my first one being with Perce National Historical Park in Montana. And I started learning very quickly that there's a lot to trying to interpret somebody else's history and to handling difficult histories and complicated histories. So it kind of became a passion of mine, and this is why I'm here today to talk to you guys, because I think it's something a lot of us struggle with. We can find facts, and facts are great, but there's also some nuances to how we handle those facts and how we talk about things. So I just want to ask you guys a quick question first. Raise your hand if you feel like during your job as a guide and an outdoor educator that what you say holds weight and importance on the perception of those that you're talking to. That's a good amount. And it should. So there's actually been a lot of research to show how important it is what tour guides say and how they do it. And it doesn't really matter what type of tour guide you are, whether you are someone who drives a bus and you are driving along and talking to your people about what they're seeing and where you're going, or you're taking people on hikes, maybe you're taking people out on the water, maybe you're even just a fishing guide. The fact of the matter is that the people you're taking out, they travel for education. They are here to experience a different type of place, and I think we can all agree, living in some place like Alaska, particularly people see a lot of things on TV, and they're super excited to come here and experience something that they already have some established ideas about. So that's the first important thing, is understanding that when we have tourists with us, they already have preconceived perceptions about what they think our state is like, and then they're looking to us as an expert to help them understand that. So the next question is, raise your hand if you feel comfortable discussing Alaska Native culture. That's a pretty typical response, so don't feel bad if you didn't raise your hand. Because most people don't. We just don't have the tools and we don't have the training to figure that out. So when it comes to talking about tourist perceptions, I always tell people, if you're going to be talking about a culture they're unfamiliar with, just remind yourself that you're part of that. So raise your hand if you were born in Alaska. Also a pretty typical response. Let me just get a feel for where everyone's from. Raise your hand if this is your first year in Alaska. Do we have a couple newbies? Couple newbies. Raise your hand if you've been here 2 or more years. 3 or more years. 4 or more years. 5 or more years. Okay, so we got some good long-term people. So, if you've been here a long time, you've already kind of done your due diligence to figure things out. And you have been your own teacher and your own student. So the first thing I'd ask of you is when you're thinking about teaching people about culture is remember, we often call them tourists, but just change it around and remember that these are students. So instead of tourists, start calling them students. They're here to learn from you. So it's your job to figure out how you should be teaching them about culture. And how you teach them that is through your narrative. So this is a big conversation topic that's happening nationwide and in other parts of the world. Is how are we teaching our narratives, and are we teaching the narratives that we should be? Because when you're out on a tour with people, even if you're not going through the motions of developing a fancy theme and coming up with a whole narrative you'll be teaching from beginning to end, you're still telling a narrative, whether you put in that work or not. So your question to yourself should be, what am I actually teaching people about Alaska Native people? And how am I teaching those narratives? So you see me with papers up here. I just spent 3 years working with Alaska Natives on this specific topic, so I'm trying to make sure I hit all the things we talked about. So how you plan your stories, the first thing is how do you honor local culture? And how do you find out about local culture? I think that's the biggest one. You can read books and you can get facts, and that's great. But what are those nuances you need to know? So I think the first one we always talk about is land acknowledgments, right? Raise your hand if you've ever done a land acknowledgement in any form. Keep your hand up if you felt completely comfortable and at ease giving that land acknowledgement and like you totally felt like you knew what you were doing. Yeah, that's okay. So the big thing I really want people to know is it's okay to be uncomfortable, and you will be. The biggest thing when you're giving your land acknowledgments is that you're constantly striving to do better and to learn more and maybe figuring out a new way to do it. So when we're doing land acknowledgments, a good way to think about them is just think of it as that introduction to the land. You're letting people know where you are, who is there, and what's important about that. So for example, I live in the Palmer area. I know that the local native name for Palmer is Nuta, Alaska. Next door is Bente, Alaska, which is Wasilla. Using those words holds meaning and is important. Learning some native words that are local that you can utilize makes a huge difference in opening up the conversation for people, and that's how you can think about your land acknowledgments is really what you're doing is you're opening up the door to conversations that will happen while you are out and while you are teaching people. Now, there's been recent conversations amongst some of us in expanding the idea of land acknowledgement that maybe you don't have to give every single little detail at the beginning. Make sure you say whose land you're on, the fact that they're still there, that they've been land stewards. But you can continue to give that info you need to give throughout your talk to make sure that you're having that respectful cultural communication, that you're making sure not to just do that at the beginning of your talk and then you checked off your box and then it's done. You're not going to mention anything about local culture from that point forward. So think about how you can work that in. Again, learning some of those words helps open the door. Language in particular is incredibly important to Alaska Natives. They always tell me when I speak to them, all of my mentors, is that the language is a product of the land, and that the land remembers, and that the land can feel it when you use those native words. So again, for example, I live in Palmer, Alaska. That's an area where the Ahtna people lived. I've taken Ahtna language classes. You don't have to take an Ahtna language class. There's actually online resources where you can find out how to say hello. You can hear it. You can memorize it. When you use language, it's curious to people. Maybe it's something they haven't heard before, and that can, again, open the door to conversations about why is language important? Why would we use the local language? Language helps bind people to the land because, again, it comes from the land. So I do encourage all of you to try to find ways to learn hello, goodbye, just really basic words. It's a lot to remember, but putting in that effort definitely means something. And in opening those doors, it also opens conversations for things like what happened to language? That's something I've been asked when I use native language is, well, I heard that maybe it's something that is dying. Why is that? So this is where we get in the conversation of your role in reconciliation as guides. As guides, you do take part in reconciliation in your part as educators. So when you talk about language, it's good to talk about the revitalization efforts that are happening, and they're happening all throughout the state. For example, you can take classes in Tlingit for free from Southeast. It's something you can do online and become a fluent speaker. You can watch videos on YouTube for these languages. You can watch videos for Eyak and Ahtna and Denali and learn all these things. So we're bringing it back, but where did it go in the first place? So part of reconciliation, your job in being a respectful cultural communicator, is understanding that you also need to tell the hard parts of the history. I was in a class where somebody mentioned that it was sad that so much language was lost and that so much culture was lost. And a woman spoke up and said, I want to correct you on that because it wasn't lost, it was actually forcibly taken from us. So that's where you come down to the nuances of the language you have. And it's not about making people uncomfortable, it's just about telling a truthful history and making people understand the whole history of what happened, because oftentimes we do kind of skirt around the details, but that doesn't do justice to the local culture and the info that people actually should be knowing about these cultures. So when you're thinking about nuances in language, again, if you say something like the word traditional is a great word because we are talking about traditional Alaska Native culture, but sometimes if we continuously use the word traditional, it can start to harken back to that idea of the past, when what we're really trying to teach people about is who are Alaska Natives today, because they are a living, dynamic culture that is a blend of both traditional and modern culture. And oftentimes our education system has a little bit failed us in helping people kind of feel more like that's all in the past, when in reality this is a current day thing. Other words, like in Alaska, we often use the word frontier. And what does frontier often come along with? It's all about being the last ones on the frontier. It's the place, the last best place, the last place that hasn't been taken over, the last place you can go in the wild. The reality is every single place that we go out here, there has been somebody on that land. Every place you stand, maybe a family set up their home there, maybe a baby was born, maybe somebody lost their grandmother there, maybe a funeral was held. And that's the reality of the land, is we are not the first ones there. This was not a frontier to be conquered. It was a place to make a home where people already had a home. So it's just all these little things that we think about while we're trying to interpret and think about when we're setting up our narratives on our tour, how are we going to impart that info? So the best practical tips I can give you is, first you want to start with researching and learning. This is about just taking the time, figuring out how you should be researching. as guides, you actually have a responsibility to be what is known as an ethical researcher. So really taking the time to make sure that you do know the facts, that you're getting them from the right place. The best place, of course, is from someone who is Alaska Native. If you can use their words in your tours, for example, you can print something out, you can print a quote out and show it to people so that they hear their words about the landscape, they hear their words about animals. That's all really important. And it takes a little bit of research and learning to do that. I would tell you to not feel scared to reach out to someone. I was asked one time, well, how do I find info about, say, stories I want to use? So stories is a really important one. Oftentimes we like to try to find Alaska Native stories and use them in our narratives. You really need permission for most stories. You should be reaching out and asking someone. Now, if you work under an organization, your organization can be part of that aspect where they reach out to a tribal council or they reach out to some sort of resource, like say the Alutiiq Museum, that's one you can reach out to, or the Alaska Native Heritage Museum. These people will reply, and they very much appreciate hearing that you're putting some forethought into what you're asking and that you're actually showing respect by saying, hey, you know what, I read this story, but I'm not sure if I should be telling the story. Because you have to remember in their cultures, they have storytellers who are the ones that tell the stories. So it behooves you, and it is respectful to find out whether or not you should be telling something and whether or not it is something you should educate on, because sometimes it's not actually our place. And be sure to use that inclusive and respectful language as you tell those narratives. Again, think about the words you're using. Are you making sure to put Alaska Natives in the current, in the present, as a living culture, as a people that are currently here? And be totally fine with saying, I have no idea. How many of you have ever said, I have no idea? I love that. Look at that. Every hand up, or else you're all lying. It's an important skill to have. It really is. And it can be hard. I think we've all been in that situation where you think, I should know this, and I really want to answer this. But especially when it comes to culture, sometimes you just need to take that step back and take your humble pill and say, you know what, I don't know, or just say, I'm not sure that I'm actually the one that should tell you that. That's where it can be good to maybe just carry a card with some resources that people can take a picture of, and that they can go do some of their own research if you're not going to have time to do it for them. That can be the most respectful thing to do sometimes. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to give you guys a lot of time real quick to reflect. So the curriculum I've been working on, I've spent the last couple of weeks actually doing a curriculum with tour companies where we're really diving into this subject. The curriculum was completely co-developed with Alaska Natives throughout the state. And we've been trying it out to see how it goes, and so far it seems to be going well, but I can't do that with you today. But what I can do is give you a reflective exercise, and I want to give you plenty of time to reflect on it, because that's the whole purpose of this, is having a little bit of internal thought. So again, when you're thinking about doing things respectfully with cultural information, turning those thoughts inward sometimes can be the most important thing you can do. So think of how it applies to you. Think about your own culture and how you would want the culture you grew up with to be interpreted. So did you guys need to say anything before we got started on a little activity for these guys to? Okay. So what I'll need you guys to do, I think if you break into like groups of 4 to 6, does that sound good? You guys think you can do that? And then I'll come around and give you guys a piece of paper. And I'm going to hop from group to group and can answer any questions you might have. Is there any overreaching question before I do that? Yes?
I wrote it down. So I was curious if you've run into any pushback from the Native peoples for using their language without, I guess my concern would be not necessarily understanding all of the different nuances that go into some of these words. Have you ever run into any of that with your mentors and their concerns for maybe not encapsulating all of those nuances?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The question was whether or not I've ever had pushback from my Alaska Native mentors on using language. That question is a great one to ask because we've talked about that And what I have been told is they really, they're working on revitalizing the language. And really, you kind of want to think about it the same way you think, would you be worried to go to school and learn Spanish? Yeah, you wouldn't think about it. There's a lot of people that speak Spanish, people that learn German, people that learn Norwegian, Japanese. In order to revitalize these languages, we need to use them. So again, like I said, I think the best place to start is simple, just simple things like good day and Atna is Huili Jen. Something simple to say. And you can always email and ask questions. There are emails attached to the resources. The sheet I'm going to give you guys does have a resource attached to it, so you can take a picture of it and check that out yourself. But yeah, that's a really good question. Again, good being thoughtful and thinking, should you use it? And if you're ever going to use something and you're not sure, just try to reach out to somebody and find out. Yeah. Another question?
Well, kind of along with that, I worked for the Department of Environmental Conservation for my career and had to work, especially during spills and reaching out for information from different native groups. And one caveat is don't assume because you've talked to a few and they think this way that everybody in that village or that group think the same way. It says we
Yes, yeah, that's a good point. Everyone is individual, and every group is individual. Doing this curriculum has been difficult because I'm aware that every single person that inputs their knowledge and their history is just as valid as the last, but they're from all over the state, right? So I have that, but I have to juggle in saying what is in this curriculum, what will we put in, what does everyone generally agree on? Because there are things you will run into, and you'll ask a friend who is one. It's like anything. Like what state you come from is the same. People will have differing opinions depending on what you go to. So it's about respecting those differing opinions and not arguing. Like, for example, we generally agree that saying that someone is Alaska Native is the most generally acceptable, correct way. But I have friends who ask for something different. I have a friend who explicitly says, I really just say Indian. And that is his opinion. He's the only one I know who asks for that. And really what it comes down to is respect what that individual says and make sure you're asking some questions if you're going to work with them and respecting that there will be different answers, and don't argue with someone because they're like, well, I don't agree with that. They come from a different cultural group. Just because you're Alaska Native doesn't mean you're just Alaska Native, and everyone agrees with everyone. And yeah, that's a really good point to make because it's true.
Sorry, I know we want to do this activity, but
Yeah.
can you touch on like the use of symbols and art and like where the line of cultural appropriation might become blurred, like buying and purchasing native art or native made artifacts, or like, sometimes you see in these fair booths and things like beautiful cuspots, and where is the line? Like, is that something that people who don't have that culture, like, is that appropriate where? But also, like, where is the line drawn with that cultural appropriation?
Yeah, that's a good question. What I've been told and what I follow is I try to support Alaska Native artists. So you find out who made it and support them and their culture and what they made. And they love to be supported. Like if you want to wear a garment they made, great, buy it and wear it, and that's fine. That's appreciation, not appropriation, especially if you're supporting the artist who actually made it. Yeah. Lee.
I was just curious on your sheet, I don't know which resources, do you have the three main resources for the equation?
Let me see, which one did I list? I did the one for the Alutiiq dictionary, because that's the easiest to search while they're here.
And then the three other organizations, okay, if I share.
Yeah, go for it.
Three other organizations that are Alaska Native organizations that put out information are the Alutiiq Museum based out of Kodiak. And they do have stories online that go with words, and they did tell me specifically that if it's online in that format, we can share it, but we need to give want to be mindful about cultural appropriation, but using that to educate yourself is educating yourself from the source. And I've also been told that using the information, sourcing it is okay, and just a lot of cultural appropriation comes from saying, like, pretend we are this, or pretend Chugach Regional Resource Commission, the Lutic Museum, and Chugach View are three really awesome resources that are going to give you influence concept.
Okay. All right, so I think let's go to the activity. Just have to spend a few minutes doing it. Like I said, if you can break into groups like 3 to 5, I think would be ideal. And don't stress out about it. This should just be a good conversation starter, really, is what it is.
So we can continue these conversations. It sounds like everybody, looks like everybody's having really wonderful discussions. I'd like to thank Heather Reiss for facilitating this. It's always great subject. I always say that I'm so impressed with the culture of the Chugach that have lived here for 5,000 years. Every time I go camping, I was out last week in the rain and the snow and the wind, and I'm like, oh my God, you know, I was sort of comfortable in all my like polyester and Gore-Tex and crap, but to think about people that have thrived out here for this long, that's my land acknowledgement. I'm just always impressed. Thank you for our speakers today, for enlightening us and educating us. Thank you all for coming. Again, thank our sponsors. And we're not done. We're going to continue in with Coffee with the Scientists. What could get better than that with a bunch of caffeinated scientists? It's got to be good. I didn't do caffeine, and I'm looking forward to it. That's at 5:30 at Lazy Otter Cafe, which is sort of right over there, but you got to go around the tracks. And then that'll be for an hour, and then at 6:30 we're going to do a social, which involves I believe some food, right, and one free drink. So you go from your upper and your caffeine to your, other drink, whatever it may be, at 6:30, and that's at Oceanfront Cafe. And then when you're all excited and ready for more, at 9 o'clock tomorrow, we reconvene for a full day of this. And thank you all very much. Also, remember surveys out in the lobby or on that QR code right up there. Helps us a lot in planning this. And again, if you have suggestions or ideas for next year, please track myself, Charlotte, William, any of the organizers here are glad to hear your ideas. Thank you all very much.